Hello dear friends, I am Dr. Banshi Saboo, diabetologist based at Ahmedabad, India. I am from Lisbon, International Diabetic Federation 2022. Today is the second day of International Diabetic Federation. Yesterday we had a fantastic inauguration. We started with multiple hall sessions, oral papers and programs on a diabetes highlights. I would like to talk on two very important topics which are less discussed, and in next 10 to 15 minutes I would like to cover those topics. One, we know that now we are moving beyond A1C. This is not new. In 2019 I was the part of the consensus for a continuous glucose monitoring in 2016-17, and in 2019 we had come out with a time in range, a concept by ATTD, and then it was accepted by all over the world, mainly by ADA and ESD, and it had come in their guideline, and it was also endorsed by Diabetes India too. I had given multiple talks on this, but here there was a session on time in range that we are moving now beyond A1C. It was well established fact for type 1 diabetes that if we have a continuous glucose monitoring and achieving a time in range for more than 70% of the time, between 70 to 180, we are having a tight glycemic control which corresponds almost A1C of less than 7, around 6.7. But one hitch for Indian, because our patients are not continuous glucose monitoring, not type 1 diabetes. The same way we don't have even our type 2 diabetic patients who are on continuous glucose monitoring, and we have to depend on A1C. So that had become a very big debate that whether we should depend on HbA1C or we should move for time in range. At this point of time, for Indian perspective, I will say that it is also complementing the patients who are doing the self monitoring of blood glucose and doing HbA1C every 3 months, and intermittently they are doing continuous glucose monitoring too to achieve the time in range. But if one can have a continuous glucose monitoring continuously, particularly type 1 diabetes, hyperglycemia and pregnancy, type 2 diabetic patients who are on multiple oral anti-diabetic agent which can lead to hypoglycemia, or on insulin therapy, or the persons who is on basal bolus therapy like type 1 diabetes, or who is at high risk of developing cardiovascular disease or hypoglycemia unawareness, if we put them on a continuous glucose monitoring, probably a time in range, a concept will change, and we have to move beyond only to achieve A1C to get less than 7. To have a less than 7 A1C, we are also worried of lot of hypoglycemia, and that's a really big challenge because hypoglycemia is a limiting factor to achieve a tight glycemic control. With advent of the new advancement in pump therapy in our patients with like 780G, many of our patients are achieving a very tight glycemic control. On a continuous glucose monitoring, we are finding their time in range of more than 90% with A1C of less than 7, or even some of the patients less than 6.5 or even 6 A1C too. So it's a time we have to think beyond A1C. We have to think the way when we were thinking before 25 years, when we were talking for each and every patient, we have to move only to get fasting and postprandial blood glucose level to the A1C. It is the same transition before 25 years. Now we are moving from A1C. The technology is talking to us and telling us now we have to move beyond and achieve a good time in range. That was one paper which was discussed here, and as it was discussed in International Diabetic Federation, which attracts the delegates from all the developing world. So that's why it is more important. When it is discussed in ADA and ESD, it is more for the Western world, more for the developed world where people are using. But when it is discussed in International Diabetic Federation, where people are coming from all over the developing world also, it makes sense, and we have to think that now it is a time that we are moving beyond A1C and have to have continuous glucose monitoring and to get time in range for those patients at least who can afford. The second aspect, which is again very interesting and it is very close to my heart, is type 1 diabetes. We know that recently there was a paper published, type 1 index from Diabetes Austria, They have worked on it. It is JDRF, Australia had working for it, and they had published this paper of type 1 diabetes index, which was published in Lancet Diabetes Endocrinology. And then all over the world, we all started talking about the type 1 diabetes, the long-term survival of that. This paper, the Peter was here and the other persons who were the part of this type 1 diabetes paper, they all were here to discuss about this type 1 index. And again, it becomes very important when it is discussed on International Diabetic Federation platform, because from all the world, the people from all the countries were here to listen and to understand how it can impact their life. If you see the data from type 1 diabetes from India, we are the one having highest number of type 1 in the world. We are the one who have lost a lot of people because of them. They could not achieve a good control of diabetes. It had also talked that how many people, like more than 26,000 type 1 diabetic patients are added in our pool. We are having highest number of type 1 in the world, in children also, type 1 children also highest in the world. And average life, if someone develops type 1 at the age of 10, only 18 years of healthy life, average 18 years of healthy life one type 1 can have. Otherwise, he is going to have the complication or early mortality. In compared to Western world, a person with type 1 diabetes can have 56 years of healthy life. So you can see the difference. And what the basic thing which we can do? We have not to do many things. We have to move from our pre-mixed insulin to basal bolus insulin therapy to all type 1. So first, all type 1 should be rightly diagnosed, and then they should be correctly treated by putting them on a basal bolus therapy. The second thing, they should do more monitoring. A once in a day or once in 3 days monitoring is not sufficient. They have to monitor 4 times in a day. And every time they have to do the correction dose and they have to do the carb counting. The third thing which they have to do is the education, empowering these type 1 children. And we have to create a capacity building program across the country to teach and educate the pediatrician, young doctors to treat type 1 diabetes, to improve the care for type 1 diabetes. If we do these 3 things, probably may not do many more advancement which are in technology like pump or continuous glucose monitoring, which can be given for 20-30% of our patients who are very affording. But for others, if we do all these things, it is not going to increase the cost of therapy by $1 per day. So I mean, you can understand with $30, maybe in another 2,500, you can improve the care for these type 1, and they can also have a almost normal survival, not 18 years, maybe 46 years, which is what the paper is saying. So that's very, very interesting. And I think this should go across the country, and each and every pediatrician, primary care physician, diabetologist, endocrinologist should know about type 1 index, which has been published recently and been discussed here in International Diabetic Federation 2022 at Lisbon. Thank you once again. Greetings from Lisbon, and thank you once again to listen me. Thank you.